Under the glittering lights of a grand gala, a billionaire's mocking challenge echoed across the room. "Play Chopin on my heirloom. Every penny's yours." No one expected the quiet janitor to step forward, let alone change the night forever. What happened next would unravel hidden pasts, test hearts, and prove that some music can reach deeper than words. If stories of kindness, redemption, and second chances speak to your heart, I invite you to join our community. Subscribe now, so you never miss a moment that might just stay with you long after the final note fades. The chandeliers of the Astoria Grand glimmered like constellations trapped in crystal, the kind of light that made every polished surface shine. Beneath their glow, Marcus Hale moved slowly along the curve of a century-old Billionaire grand piano. His calloused hands, trained long ago for both music and war, now held a worn microfiber cloth. Each pass over the ebony surface was deliberate, reverent. He was not just cleaning it. He was remembering what it meant to care for something worth keeping. A murmur rippled through the crowd of early arriving gala guests, champagne flutes in hand, their chatter a soft hum under the orchestral tuning from the stage. Then came a sharper sound, a laugh, crisp and cutting, slicing through the gentle music of clinking glasses. "Play Chopin on my heirloom. Every penny's yours." The words belonged to Connor Walsh, a tall man with silvering hair and an expression crafted from decades of practiced condescension. The acclaimed music critic stood just beyond the velvet rope, voice pitched to carry. He gestured toward the piano as though Marcus were a curious display rather than a man. A few in the crowd chuckled. Others smirked over the rims of their glasses. Connor thrived in these moments, dangling a challenge he believed no one would dare take. Marcus's back straightened. The cloth paused mid-stroke. His gaze did not move to Connor. It lingered instead on the keys, closed beneath the polished lid, as if they were a door he had promised himself never to open again. From the side of the room, a small voice rose. "Does he mean it, Dad?" Emma stood a few steps away, clutching her sketchbook against the front of her dress. 9 years old, bright-eyed, with that blend of innocence and perception that often sees further than adults care to admit. She looked between her father and the man in the tailored suit, waiting for an answer. Marcus's jaw tightened. "It's not worth." Before he could finish, another set of eyes found him. Kate Moreau, owner of the Astoria Grand and host of the evening, stood near the base of the grand staircase. Tall, poised, with a grace sharpened by years of commanding boardrooms, she regarded Marcus with an expression somewhere between curiosity and disdain. She had heard the challenge. She had seen the ripple it caused. Her gaze lingered, as though she were measuring not just the man but the silence he carried. Connor laughed again, stepping closer. "What's the matter, Hale? Don't tell me the help has stage fright." The crowd's amusement deepened. The air in the room shifted. Marcus set the cloth down on the bench. For a moment, he placed one hand on the piano, his thumb brushing the grain of the wood. A pulse of something. Memory, maybe. Moved through him. Emma's eyes shone with a question she did not dare voice. Marcus drew a breath, then turned toward the wings of the stage. His boots carried him into the dim light at the edge of the curtains. And just before the guests could decide whether they had won their little spectacle, the scene dissolved. 3 days earlier, the Billionaire sat covered in its dust cloth, silent and untouched in the great hall. Marcus had been the first one in that morning, the echo of his footsteps the only company in the vast marble space. He had taken the job at the Astoria Grand for reasons that had little to do with music and everything to do with keeping Emma clothed, fed, in a safe school district. In another life, his mornings had begun with scales and etudes, with the clean sting of rosin in the air and the weight of expectation pressing from every direction. That life had ended in a hospital room, the day Rachel's hand slipped from his. Since then, he had learned to make himself small, to move through the world without drawing the kind of attention that demanded more than he could give. But working in a building that hosted the city's most prestigious recitals was its own quiet torture. He could not avoid the sound checks, the rehearsals that spilled through open doors. Sometimes, when no one was looking, he would pause in the back row of the empty hall and listen until the ache became too sharp. Then he would return to his duties, as invisible as the polish on the brass rails. That morning, as he lifted the dust cloth from the Billionaire, the smooth gleam of its surface caught a stray shaft of sunlight. He had traced the lid with the flat of his palm, the way someone might touch the name on a gravestone. Tender, hesitant, aware of the weight beneath. Emma had appeared then, sneakers squeaking softly against the marble. "Is this the one you told me about?" she asked, setting her backpack down. He nodded. "Billionaire. Older than both of us put together. Built for music halls like this one. Will you play it for me?" He had smiled, a tired, reflexive thing. "Not today, kiddo." She had frowned, but opened her sketchbook anyway, pencil scratching as she began to capture the piano's long, elegant curve. From the mezzanine above, unseen, Kate Moreau paused in her walkthrough of the hall. She watched the man in maintenance blues stand beside her prized heirloom, speaking to a little girl with a softness that felt out of place in this fortress of prestige. Connor Walsh had been there too, leaning against the rail with his ever-present smirk. "Careful, Catherine," he murmured to her. "You let the staff get too comfortable around the stage, and next thing you know, they'll be taking requests." Kate had given no reply, but she had kept her eyes on Marcus and the way his hand lingered on the piano as though it still knew him. Now, 3 days later, under the blaze of the gala lights, that same hand rested on the Billionaire once more. This time in front of hundreds of watchful eyes. Marcus's fingers tapped once against the polished wood. Then he lifted the cloth, folded it with care, and set it aside. Whatever happened next would belong to more than just him. The Astoria Grand was a building that carried its own heartbeat. In the mornings, when the doors were still locked and the marble floors untouched by polished shoes, the sound was a low, steady thrum, the quiet creak of wood beams settling, the distant hum of the HVAC, the faint echo of the city outside. For Marcus Hale, those were the best moments. No crowds, no eyes on him, just a space to work in peace. He had been at the Astoria Grand for 2 years, long enough to know which elevators shuttered halfway to the mezzanine, which faucets in the guest suites dripped no matter how you replaced the washers, which chandeliers needed dusting with a feather, light enough not to disturb the ancient crystal. It was work he could do without much thought, and that was the point. The Navy had given him structure after that. Missions, orders, noise loud enough to drown out the sound of his own thoughts. But service ended, bills arrived, and he was left with a little girl who deserved better than the scraps of a man still grieving. So here he was, Marcus Hale, maintenance technician at one of Manhattan's crown jewels of culture, making sure the great machine of art and luxury ran smoothly, from the flicker of a backstage light bulb to the flawless shine on the grand pianos. Her reputation in the city was a mix of admiration and intimidation. The press called her the deal-maker's dealer, a woman who could buy and sell entire blocks with a single phone call. What they didn't print was how little she allowed herself to be known outside the boardroom. People could speculate. She rarely corrected them. Connor Walsh entered not long after, his arrival marked by the faint scent of expensive cologne and the easy confidence of a man who had never been told to wait in a lobby. The critic's critic, Connor's words could make or break a performer's season, and he relished that power. He spoke in carefully crafted sentences, each one designed to sound like an observation but land like a verdict. From his vantage point on the balcony, Connor spotted Marcus across the hall, bent over a toolbox near the stage. The faintest smile curved his mouth, the kind you'd expect from someone recognizing a face in a yearbook he'd prefer to forget. He leaned on the railing, voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "Well," Connor said, "if it isn't Hale. I wondered what became of you after Juilliard." Marcus's head lifted slightly, but he didn't turn. "I work here now." "I can see that." Connor's tone was pleasant enough to fool someone who didn't know him. "Maintenance, A far cry from the concert stage." Marcus kept his attention on the tool in his hand. "It's honest work." Connor's smile sharpened. "Some would say disappearing is the most honest choice you could have made." The implication was subtle, but it landed. A few feet away, a stagehand glanced between them, sensing the weight behind the words without understanding the history. Kate, still reviewing her checklist, caught the tail end of the exchange. Her eyes flicked to Marcus, noting the way his shoulders tightened, but his voice stayed level. She filed it away without comment. The Bluthner grand piano, Kate's prized heirloom, sat at center stage under a heavy dust cloth. It would be unveiled and tuned later, but Marcus had been asked to check the bench and pedal fittings. He approached it quietly, lifting the cloth just enough to see the gleam beneath. The finish was so perfect it reflected the overhead lights like water. His hand hovered above the keys. He should have walked away. He knew the risk of even touching it. But something pulled at him. Not the grandeur of the instrument, but the way it seemed to wait. His fingers found one key, pressing it down just enough to let a single note escape. The sound was pure, resonant, filling the empty hall like sunlight through a window. Marcus released the key, the note dissolving into the quiet. He replaced the dust cloth, adjusted the bench, and stepped away as though nothing had happened. But Kate kept her eyes on him for a moment longer, before turning back to her checklist. The heartbeat of the Astoria Grand went on, steady and unbroken. But something in the hall had shifted. The afternoon crowd at the Astoria Grand had thinned to a polite murmur. Caterers wheeled covered trays through the side corridors. A pair of florists adjusted the angle of white lilies under the chandeliers. Emma Hale slipped past them like a sparrow in a cathedral, hugging her sketchbook to her chest. The security guard at the far door gave her a small nod. Everybody knew the maintenance guy's kid who waited after school in the balcony seats. Pencil in hand, eyes everywhere at once. She moved toward the stage where the dust cloth had been folded back from the Bluthner. Even at rest, the instrument seemed awake, a long, dark animal breathing beneath the house lights. Emma stopped a few feet away and drew a careful outline. The curve of the lid, the generous shoulders, the lion's paw casters that made it look, to her, like it could walk if it wanted to. Marcus approached from the wings, carrying a small toolkit and a bottle of polish. Seeing his daughter near the piano softened his face in the way nothing else could. He set the kit down, crouched, so his eyes were level with hers. "You're supposed to be doing math," he said, the words firm but warm. "I already did," she answered, holding up the sketchbook like proof. 2 pages. Mrs. Parker checked. He followed her gaze to the Bluthner, the corners of his mouth lifted. "You like this one better than the Steinway?" "It looks like it knows secrets," she said. "What kind of piano is it again?" "Bluthner. German. Older than most of the people who will hear it tonight." He tapped the rim with a knuckle. The wood gave a gentle whisper. They were famous for their singing tone, not flashy. Honest. Some models had an extra set of strings. This one does not. But it carries sound the way a good story carries truth. Emma sat cross-legged on the carpeted apron of the stage, pencil ready. "Tell me a story about it." He glanced toward the empty hall, then back to her. He kept his sentences measured, facts first, feeling disguised as context. Chopin never played a Billionaire that we know of. He died before this brand became famous. But his music lives well here. Billionaires reward clarity. They let melodies breathe. Chopin needs breath, not force. Emma's pencil slowed. So if someone plays Chopin on this, it would sound like somebody telling the truth. That would be the goal, he said. He reached for the polish, then paused, the silent request in her face as clear as any spoken question. He lifted the lid with both hands, gentle, deliberate. The strings shimmered in neat ranks, the long spine of the instrument glowing like amber under the lights. "How old is it?" she asked. "About a century, maybe a bit more. Your great-grandmother's age if she were still here. The company that made it survived wars, rationing, factories rebuilt from rubble. A lot of music does not survive history. This one did." Emma looked from the strings to his hands. "Did you ever play Chopin on a piano like this?" Marcus kept his eyes on the fallboard. He dusted the edge as if dust mattered. "I helped tune a Billionaire once, years ago, at school. I listened to someone else play." The half-truth sat between them. He felt it. She felt it. The hall felt it. Emma did not press. She never did. She turned another page, began shading the keyboard in soft strokes. Her assistant whispered a question about seating charts. Kate answered without looking away. "Swap tables 6 and 9. Keep the donors who want to be seen near the stairs. Give the musicians space." Then, because habit reasserted itself, she straightened. The softness vanished. The CEO returned. Connor Walsh entered from the mezzanine doors with a leisurely stride, the scent of his cologne traveling half a step ahead of him. He leaned his elbows on the brass rail, considered the tableau, smiled as if he had discovered a scene staged for his amusement. "Charming," he said to no one in particular, then louder. "Hale, you polishing or praying?" Marcus did not look up. "Doing my job." Connor descended the stairs, each footfall unhurried, every gesture designed to draw eyes. 2 ushers paused mid-conversation. A florist straightened. Even the sound engineer in the booth lifted his headset to listen. "Ah, the job," Connor said, arriving at the foot of the stage. A reliable, modest word. Useful when one has put other ambitions to bed. He smiled at Emma, a bright, insincere crescent. "And who is this student of architecture?" "My daughter," Marcus said, neutral, unoffended, immovable. "A family man," Connor noted. "Excellent branding." He gestured toward the Billionaire. "Tell me, did you pick up that charming lecture about Chopin and breath from YouTube? Or is this a new maintenance module from corporate, polishing with pathos?" Something in the air tightened. One of the stagehands, a woman named Layla who had worked union crews for 20 years, stepped closer to the apron. "He keeps this place running when your critics' darlings throw tantrums and slam doors," she said, voice even. "Show some respect." A caterer across the aisle snickered. "Respect is for tickets and tips, not for speeches." A few heads nodded, a few did not. The hall, even half empty, had a way of choosing sides. Emma's chin lifted. "He knows about pianos because he listens, not because he wants you to clap," she said. Her voice was small, but clear. Connor's eyebrows climbed, delighted, the way a cat delights in a mouse that talks back. "Sharp tongue. Must get that from her mother," he said. The silence that followed was immediate, real. Marcus's hands closed on the edge of the bench, white at the knuckles, then released. He rose without haste, stood between Connor and the child by the piano, not menacing, simply present. "My daughter's mother was decent and brave, and she is gone," he said, each word set down like a stone. "I will ask you not to use her as a punchline." Connor lifted his hands in mock surrender. I intended no harm, but this is an art venue. Feelings are the medium. He tilted his head at the Billionaire. Since you are so eloquent about breath, why not prove your thesis? A phrase, a bar, anything in G minor perhaps. The dare hung there, thin, glittering, all edge. Emma looked up at her father, eyes like questions. Marcus could have walked away. He should have, he told himself. He always told himself. But the hall had its own logic, the kind that pressed on a man's back until he rediscovered a straighter spine. He sat, not fully, just enough to angle his hand over the keys. His thumb found middle C, his forefinger, D, the smallest shape of a chord. He played one note, then another. Not a melody. An exhale. The piano answered with a tone so round it seemed to carry its own halo. He closed his eyes, only for a breath, the way a person glances at an old photograph and then tucks it away. Layla let out an involuntary yes under her breath, barely a sound, more like agreement given shape. The caterer smirked again, then, hearing the resonance hang longer than he expected, smirked less. The violinist nodded, a reflex of recognition, not of fame, of craft. Connor's smile thinned. Anyone can pluck two notes and call it sentiment, he said, but the line lacked heat. From above, Kate took a step closer to the rail, the better to see the angle of Marcus's wrist, the way his shoulders unlocked as he released the keys. For a flash of a second, she was 16 again, alone at a school auditorium piano, aware only of sound and the way it stitched the room together. The memory startled her. She folded it away with the speed of someone who has practice at such things. Marcus stood, the bench barely shifting. "We are done," he said to Connor, calm, unshaken. "Please let the crew do their work." Connor shrugged, as if bored. "By all means," he said, and strolled toward the aisle with the leisurely confidence of a man followed by his own reputation. The faction lines in the hall remained, not quite drawn in chalk, but visible. Layla gave Marcus a brief nod. The violinist lifted his case. The caterer busied himself with a tray to avoid eye contact. Emma returned to her sketchbook, the piano now shaded darker, the keys bright, the man beside it taller than before. Down on the stage, Marcus lowered the lid, the Billionaire's tone still trembling in the room's bones. A spark had been set, barely visible, but real, the kind that finds a path through dry timber when the wind changes. He could feel it in his chest, the faintest warmth, not yet a fire, not yet safe, but alive. He picked up his toolkit, nodded to Layla, touched Emma's shoulder with 2 fingers, and went back to work. The private dining room at the Astoria Grand was a place where deals were struck in whispers. The lighting was soft, designed to flatter skin and dull suspicion. Kate Moreau sat at the head of a mahogany table, a glass of sparkling water untouched before her. Across from her, Connor Walsh lounged in a chair like it was his own living room. "I want to ask you something," Kate began, her tone measured, "about Marcus Hale." Connor smiled as if she'd just confirmed a suspicion. "Ah, the mystery janitor with a pianist's hands." Kate didn't react. "You two clearly know each other. What's his story?" "At Juilliard, a rumor once cost him everything. Tonight would tell a different story." "And the unofficial record?" Kate pressed. Kate's gaze didn't waver. "You believe he cheated?" "I know what I saw," Connor said, swirling the last of his wine. "And I know the piece he played wasn't his to play." The practice room smelled faintly of varnish and ambition. Marcus sat at the grand piano in room 214, his fingers coaxing a nocturne into life. It was late, the hallways quiet except for the occasional echo of scales from far-off rooms. He closed his eyes, letting the music find its own pace. Marcus kept playing. Just keeping my hands warm. No, Marcus said. Just clearing my head. When the final note fell, there was a heartbeat of silence before the applause came. But in the judges' chambers afterward, whispers began. Connor was already waiting. Magnificent, wasn't it? He said to the panel. Shame it's not exactly his work. I've heard a recording just like it. Same phrasing, same mistakes even. He left. Kate studied Connor's face. And after that? Connor shrugged. He disappeared. I heard he enlisted. Navy, I think. Then, nothing. Until today. Kate's mind filled in the blank spaces. She'd done enough business to know how quickly rumor became truth when repeated by someone with authority. But something in Connor's version felt curated. She'd seen Marcus's restraint in the hall earlier, the way he avoided public confrontation, the way he shielded his daughter from ugliness. That didn't fit the profile of a man hungry for shortcuts. Why do you care? Connor asked suddenly. It's my gala, Kate replied coolly. The last thing I need is a scandal tied to the evening's entertainment. Connor leaned back, satisfied. Then you'll keep him where he belongs, behind the scenes, out of sight. Kate walked through the empty main hall, the chandeliers throwing fractured light onto the stage. The Bluthner sat there, lid closed, silent as a sealed letter. She imagined Marcus at that piano, imagined the scandal Connor had painted, imagined the headlines if someone decided to resurrect it, the stakes of the gala, the donors, the press, left no room for uncertainty. And yet, the image that wouldn't leave her was not of a young man in disgrace, of a father leaning toward his daughter, telling her about a piano as if it were a living thing. Her phone buzzed, a text from her assistant confirming another sponsorship. Kate replied, then slipped the phone away. She told herself distance was the smart choice. She told herself she would keep it. But she also knew she'd be watching him more closely from now on. As Kate turned to leave, she passed by the side corridor that led to the staff rooms. Through the glass panel of a half-closed door, she saw Marcus sitting alone at a small, upright piano, head bent, hands unmoving on the keys. Not playing, just there. She didn't linger. But for the first time, she felt the faint pull of something she wasn't ready to name. The morning of the rehearsal, the main hall of the Astoria Grand gleamed as if it had been dipped in gold. Rows of chairs faced the stage in perfect symmetry. The chandeliers glittered with ruthless precision. The Bluthner Grand sat in the center, like a monarch awaiting coronation. Kate Moreau stood beside it, scanning her schedule, the sharp click of her heels echoing in the empty space. She didn't hear Marcus enter at first. He was pushing a small cart loaded with tuning tools, microfiber cloths, and a case for spare pedals. He moved with the quiet efficiency of someone used to being invisible. He stopped short, his eyes meeting hers for only a second, before drifting toward the instrument. "That's not my job," he said simply. "It would take less than a minute," Kate replied, her voice even. "I'm not a pianist," Marcus said, and though his tone was calm, there was a finality in it that made the air between them colder. Kate studied him for a moment. "You're a technician who knows how a piano should sound. That's all I'm asking." I said no. He began wiping the side of the instrument, his movement slow but deliberate, as if to close the matter. That afternoon, as Kate was reviewing seating arrangements in the balcony, she heard small footsteps behind her. She turned to find Emma Hale, hands clasped in front of her, looking up with wide, determined eyes. "Mrs. Moreau?" Emma's voice was polite but unwavering. "Yes, Emma," Kate asked. The girl took a breath. "If my dad plays Chopin on your piano, would you really keep your word? Would you give him every penny?" Kate blinked. "That's quite the question." "It's just, you said it in front of everyone the other night," Emma continued, "and you looked like you meant it." Kate glanced toward the stage, empty now except for the grand piano under its dust cover. And if I did keep my word? Then he'd play, Emma said without hesitation. He just needs to know you're serious. Emma's smile bloomed instantly, but Kate added, "But that's between us for now. Understood?" She clicked play. The video opened on a young man in a black suit, shoulders slightly hunched as he sat at the piano. He took a long breath before his hands descended onto the keys. And then, the first notes of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 spilled into the room, not tentative, not cautious, but alive. The tempo swelled and receded with a kind of unspoken conversation, as if he were speaking through the instrument in a language older than words. His expression was neither showy nor restrained. It was pure focus, as though nothing else existed. Halfway through, the camera cut briefly to the judges. One woman's eyes glistened. Another man leaned forward, elbows on his knees, utterly still. By the time the final chord faded, there was a silence so thick it felt like the room itself had forgotten to breathe. Kate closed the laptop slowly. If Connor's version of the story was true, that Marcus had stolen phrasing, mimicked a recording, it didn't show here. What she'd heard was no imitation. It was raw, deeply human, and uncomfortably moving. For the first time since she'd met Marcus, Kate found herself unsettled not by suspicion, by the question of how a man who could play like that could choose to disappear into the shadows of her building. She didn't know if the idea thrilled her or terrified her, but she knew, with sudden clarity, that she wanted to find out. The days leading up to the gala were a blur of polished silverware, last-minute guest confirmations, and tense phone calls. In Kate Moreau's office, the sunlight spilled across a desk stacked with contracts. She was reviewing the seating chart when her phone lit up with a name she couldn't ignore. Charles Devlin, the primary sponsor of the gala. "Kate," Charles said without preamble, "I've heard some troubling whispers about your staff, specifically that janitor who seems to enjoy loitering near the Bluthner." Kate's grip tightened on the phone. "Marcus Hale is part of the maintenance crew? Why?" "I have no problem with a man doing honest work," Charles replied. "But there are rumors, and this event is about optics. You know how the press works. One wrong association, and suddenly the headlines are about scandal, not philanthropy." He paused, letting the implications settle. "Do yourself a favor. Keep him away from the gala floor. Better yet, take him off the schedule for that night." Kate closed her eyes for a moment. "I'll handle it." That afternoon, she found Marcus in the main hall, polishing the brass foot pedals of the Bluthner. He glanced up briefly, then returned to his work. "Marcus," she began, her tone deliberately neutral. "There's been a change. I'll need to adjust the staff schedule for the gala." He straightened, cloth in hand. "All right. What do you need?" "You won't be on duty that night. I'll have someone else cover your shift." The pause that followed was short, but heavy. "Is there a reason?" Marcus asked. "It's a matter of logistics," Kate said carefully. His eyes narrowed slightly, though his voice stayed calm. "Logistics. Right." Kate considered explaining, telling him about Charles, the politics, the money. But she didn't. She told herself it was to spare him the insult. In truth, she wasn't sure if she was protecting him or herself. Marcus didn't wait for more. By evening, he had made up his mind. He walked into the staff locker room, pulled out an old duffel bag, and began packing his tools. The sound of wrenches and cloths clinking into the bag filled the narrow space. Emma found him there, her school backpack still on her shoulders. "Dad? What are you doing?" "Finishing up," Marcus said, forcing a small smile. "I won't be working here anymore." Her brows knit together. "Because of her?" "Emma." "You think I don't know?" She cut in. "She's just like the others. They see the uniform and decide that's all you are. They don't care about the rest. Marcus hesitated, the truth clawing at the back of his throat. But Emma's words burned brighter than any explanation he could offer. Kate was still in her office when Emma appeared at the doorway, her voice trembling but fierce. "You're wrong about him," Emma said. Kate set her pen down. "Emma, you're just like everyone else. You only see the jacket he wears, not the man inside it." The girl's voice cracked at the edges, but she held her ground. "You don't know what he's given up or why." Kate opened her mouth, but Emma turned and left before she could form an answer. The echo of those words, "not the man inside it," stayed behind long after the footsteps faded. By nightfall, Marcus had turned in his ID badge and handed over his keys. No speeches, no confrontation. Just a quiet exit through the side door, the duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The halls of the Astoria Grand seemed colder without him. In the dim glow of the street lamps, Marcus and Emma walked away from the building, their figures shrinking against the Manhattan skyline. Neither spoke. The city's hum filled the silence between them, a reminder that life would keep moving, with or without a place in it for music. The morning after Marcus left the Astoria Grand, the apartment was quieter than usual. The tools he used to keep in the corner were gone. The worn work jacket hung limp on the back of a chair. Marcus sat at the small kitchen table, nursing a mug of black coffee gone lukewarm, staring out the window at the brick wall across the alley. Emma padded in, clutching something behind her back. "I made you something," she said, her voice softer than her usual morning energy. Marcus glanced over, eyebrows lifting. "Yeah? What is it?" She slid a folded sheet of paper across the table. Marcus opened it and stopped breathing for a moment. It was a pencil drawing of him, not in his janitor's uniform, but seated at the Bluthner, hands poised over the keys. The details were striking, the gleam of the piano's curves, the reflection of light on the polished lid. Emma herself standing just off to the side in the picture, watching him. "You think I look like that?" Marcus asked, his voice low. Emma shrugged. "That's how you look when you play. Not like you're cleaning something, but like you're home." She hesitated, then met his eyes. "Maybe it's time to cross the street, Dad." The phrase landed heavier than he expected. Marcus leaned back, staring at the drawing again. Cross the street. Leave the shadow he'd been walking in for years. That evening, the Astoria Grand blazed with light. The annual gala had drawn the city's elite, bankers in crisp tuxedos, patrons in sweeping gowns, the air thick with perfume and the clink of champagne flutes. Kate Moreau glided between tables, her gown the color of midnight silk, every movement controlled. On stage, the MC was introducing Connor Walsh. He approached the microphone with the same smug confidence he wore like a tailored suit. "Ladies and gentlemen," Connor began, his smile razor-sharp. "Tonight is not just about philanthropy. It's about honoring tradition. And speaking of tradition," his eyes swept the crowd until they landed on a figure standing discreetly at the back of the room. "I wonder if a certain familiar face might be willing to provide us with a bit of entertainment." A murmur rippled through the guests. Connor gestured toward Marcus. "Play Chopin on my Heirloom. Every penny's yours. I believe that was the arrangement, wasn't it?" His voice carried easily through the microphone, laced with mockery. Kate's head snapped toward Connor, a flicker of alarm in her eyes. She hadn't known he would pull this stunt. Not here. Not now. Marcus, still in his plain button-down and dark slacks, felt the weight of every gaze in the room. For a long moment he didn't move. Then Emma's drawing, folded in his pocket, seemed to burn against his chest. He walked forward. The sound of his shoes on the marble floor was almost drowned out by the hum of whispered speculation. Two security staff stepped forward at a sponsor's nod. Before they could speak, Kate lifted her hand from across the room. "Stand down. Let him through." The signal was small, but the room felt it. He reached the Bluthner. The dust cover was already off, its black surface gleaming under the stage lights. Marcus rested his fingertips lightly on the keys, exhaling slowly, as if the air itself needed to be cleared before he began. And then he played. The opening of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 rose into the air like a story only the piano could tell. Hesitant at first, then gathering courage. The notes swelled and receded, shifting from tenderness to urgency, every phrase alive with the weight of memory and the ache of possibility. The room fell silent. Waiters froze mid-step. Conversations cut off mid-word. Even Connor's smirk faltered. Marcus's shoulders moved with the music, but his eyes stayed closed, the world outside reduced to felt hammers and vibrating strings. Somewhere in the middle, Kate realized her breath was caught in her throat. The sound was not polished perfection. It was raw, honest, threaded with both grief and hope. When the final chord faded, the silence that followed was absolute. Not awkward, but reverent, as though the room itself understood something sacred had just happened. Then, slowly, applause began. It grew into a standing ovation, a wave of sound that filled the hall and refused to die down. Marcus stood, nodded once, and stepped away from the piano. For the first time in years, his chest felt lighter. The applause had faded, but the air in the Astoria Grand still felt charged, as if the final notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 were hovering just beyond hearing. Marcus stood near the edge of the stage, unsure whether to stay or leave. The reactions were mixed. In the front rows, several guests dabbed discreetly at their eyes, murmuring about the emotion in his playing. A silver-haired woman clutched her husband's arm, whispering, "That wasn't just music. That was a confession." Others, however, exchanged knowing smirks, the kind that dismissed what they'd just seen. "A nice little moment," one man said under his breath. "But that doesn't make him a pianist again. Probably just a minute of adrenaline." The room seemed split right down the middle. Believers and skeptics. Connor Walsh stood a few feet from the stage, his expression unusually restrained. The easy arrogance that had colored his every word earlier was gone. His eyes, sharp and calculating, now carried something quieter, something Marcus couldn't name. Connor didn't approach. He simply watched, jaw tight, as if wrestling with a decision. Kate Moreau moved before anyone else could. She crossed the stage with the deliberate grace that made people step aside without being asked. When she reached the Bluthner, she didn't speak. Instead, she rested her fingertips lightly on the polished wood above the keys, the same place Marcus's hands had been moments ago. It was a small gesture, but Marcus felt its weight. She wasn't just touching a piano. She was acknowledging what had just happened, the truth of it, in a way words would have only diluted. Their eyes met briefly, and for the first time since they'd known each other, there was no challenge in hers. Only quiet recognition. The evening carried on as galas do. Champagne refilled, silent auction bids placed, polite laughter drifting above the sound of clinking glasses. But for Marcus, it was all a haze. When he finally stepped outside into the crisp night air, the noise of the city felt like a relief. He didn't hear the footsteps until Connor's voice came from the shadows near the valet stand. "Hail." Marcus turned, his posture instinctively guarded. "Walsh." Connor's hands were in his coat pockets. For a moment, he seemed to be searching for the right place to start. "That back there, I didn't expect you to still have it in you." Marcus's voice was flat. "You mean the ability to play without your permission?" Connor gave a humorless half smile. "No, I mean the ability to make a room stop breathing." He exhaled, glancing at the street before looking back. "I owe you something. The truth." Marcus didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. Marcus's jaw tightened. So you lied, and I lost everything. I did, Connor admitted, the words almost strangled on the way out. And I can't give you back the years you spent in uniform instead of at a piano. But I can tell you this. I've never stopped regretting it. Marcus studied him, searching for cracks in the performance, but Connor's gaze didn't waver. For once, there was no smirk, no baiting tone, just a man standing in the cold, wrestling with the wreckage he'd caused. Why tell me now? Marcus asked. Connor hesitated. Because after what I heard tonight, I realized the scandal I created never buried you. It just delayed you. And maybe it's time someone said it out loud. For a long moment, the city noise filled the silence between them. Car horns in the distance, the rumble of a bus passing by. Apology accepted? Connor asked finally. Marcus didn't give him the satisfaction of a quick answer. We'll see, he said, then turned and walked toward the corner, the folded drawing in his pocket once again pressing against his chest. Behind him, Connor stayed in the shadows, watching until Marcus disappeared from view. Marcus arrived at Kate Moreau's office the following afternoon, unsure what to expect. The space was nothing like the glitter of the Astoria Grand. It was warm, lined with shelves of leather-bound books and framed photographs, the scent of polished wood and faint jasmine in the air. Behind her desk, Kate stood waiting, a folder in her hands. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing for him to sit. Marcus hesitated, but took the chair opposite her. "What's this about?" She opened the folder, revealing a yellowed photograph. A young man in a World War I uniform stood beside a grand piano that looked unmistakably familiar. "This," Kate began, her tone softer than usual, "is my great-grandfather. He served in the American Expeditionary Forces in France. That Billionaire you played at the gala belonged to him. He bought it after the war with his soldier's pay. Music was the only thing that kept him sane after what he saw in the trenches." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his eyes tracing the photograph. "But during the influenza pandemic," Kate continued, "he sold it to pay for medicine for his wife and children. He never saw it again. Decades later, my father tracked it down at an estate sale. He restored it, and it's been in my family ever since." She met his gaze. "That's why my challenge to you wasn't just a line for the crowd. I meant it. If you want it, the Billionaire is yours." Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "That piano belongs to your family." Kate shook her head. "It belongs to someone who can make it live, the way you did the other night." He let the silence stretch, the weight of the offer pressing between them. Finally, he said, "I can't take money for what I played, and I can't take something so tied to your family's history. But," his eyes lifted, steady, "if you're serious about music mattering, then let's make it matter for people who need it most. Veterans, kids who can't afford lessons, people like me who thought they'd lost their music forever." Kate tilted her head, considering him. "I'll design the program," Marcus went on. "You fund it, not as a charity project, but as something that has legs, something that lasts." A slow smile spread across her face. "Agreed." When Marcus left her office, the air felt sharper, cleaner. He didn't notice the envelope tucked under his apartment door until hours later. There was no return address, just his name written in a firm hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting neat but slightly shaky. "Mr. Hale, I don't know you, but I was there the night you played. I'm an old Marine, and I've lived long enough to know when a man is telling the truth without saying a word. That piano you touched, it once belonged to a soldier who gave up his own dreams to save his family. Hearing you play felt like it finally found its way back to the right hands. Thank you for bringing it home. Semper Fi, James K. Loring. Marcus read the letter twice, his throat tightening. Whoever this man was, he understood something Marcus hadn't yet said aloud, that the gift wasn't about ownership, but about restoration. That night, Marcus placed the letter beside Emma's drawing on his desk. 2 small pieces of paper, but together, they felt like a map pointing forward. And for the first time in years, the road ahead didn't look empty. The old brick chapel at the edge of town had been abandoned for years, its stained glass windows gathering dust, and its pews warped from neglect. But now, warm light spilled from its arched doorways, the scent of fresh varnish mixing with the faint perfume of old wood. Where sermons had once echoed, music now filled the air. Marcus Hale stood at the front, his hands resting on the lid of an upright piano that had been tuned only 2 days earlier. Behind him, the once cracked plaster was painted a soft cream, and the restored windows glowed with color when the afternoon sun passed through. Kate had funded the restoration quietly, letting Marcus decide how the space would be used. "This is where it begins," Marcus told the small group of children and adults seated in mismatched chairs. "It doesn't matter if you've never touched a piano before. What matters is that you're here, ready to try." Among them sat Emma, her face glowing with excitement. She had been waiting for this moment since the night of the gala. Her small hands gripped the edge of her seat, feet swinging just above the floor. The first lesson was simple. Middle C, finger placement, letting the keys respond to a gentle touch rather than a heavy hand. Marcus moved between students, his voice calm and encouraging. When he reached Emma, she looked up and grinned. "Like this, Dad?" she asked, pressing a tentative note. "Exactly like that," he said, the pride in his voice unmistakable. "You've got the touch already." Emma's laughter blended with the sound of hesitant notes filling the chapel, a patchwork of music that somehow felt whole. 2 weeks later, the program held its first community performance. Folding chairs lined the chapel, neighbors and curious onlookers crowding in to see what the music project was about. At the back of the room, Connor Walsh slipped in quietly, wearing a dark coat and no trace of his usual smugness. He didn't approach Marcus before the performance began. He simply found a seat near the wall and folded his hands in his lap. One by one, the students played, simple melodies, clumsy in parts, but met with warm applause. Emma played "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," her fingers stumbling once, but recovering with a quick glance at her father. Marcus clapped the loudest. When the last student took their bow, Marcus turned to address the audience. "Music isn't about perfection," he said. "It's about connection. Every note you heard tonight was someone reaching out, and every clap is proof that someone reached back." From her seat in the front row, Kate rose and walked to the piano. "And sometimes," she said, her voice carrying through the quiet, "music is about conversation." She extended a hand toward him. "Shall we?" Marcus hesitated for only a moment before joining her. She sat at the treble end, he at the bass. Without a word, they began to play. A simple duet arrangement of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The melody flowed between them, seamless, like a dialogue they'd been having for years without knowing it. Their eyes met once, mid-phrase. This time, there was no guardedness, no unspoken accusation, just understanding. When the final chord faded, the room erupted in applause. Even Connor stood, clapping slowly at first, then with genuine force. Marcus glanced toward him, and for a brief second, the two men shared a look that suggested the past had loosened its grip, if only slightly. As the audience filtered out into the cool night, Marcus lingered at the piano, his fingers still resting on the keys. Kate stood beside him. "This place will change lives," she said quietly. "It already has," Marcus replied, his eyes on Emma, who was showing her sheet music to a new friend. Kate smiled. "Then let's keep going." The chapel had never been so full. Every pew was packed, folding chairs lining the aisles, and people still stood along the back wall. The soft hum of anticipation filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of wax and polished wood. Outside, the winter night pressed close, but inside, the glow from the stained glass windows turned the space into something warm, almost sacred. Marcus Hale stood at the front beside the Billionaire, its deep wood gleaming under the soft lights. His hands rested on the polished edge, his eyes sweeping over the faces before him. Neighbors, veterans, children clutching sheet music, and in the very front row, Kate and Emma. A hush fell over the room. Marcus took his seat at the bench. He didn't open any sheet music. There was none. The composition he was about to play had been living in him for months, piece by piece, finding its way out only in quiet moments, after lessons, or late at night, when the chapel was empty. It wasn't a song for grief, though grief had birthed it. It was a song for life continuing, for second chances, for the stubborn light that refuses to go out. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, like footsteps into a familiar place after too long away. Then, the melody opened, warm and full, weaving threads of joy through echoes of sorrow. The bass moved steady beneath it, like a heartbeat. Midway, the piece swelled, not into grandeur, but into something intimate and unshakably hopeful. The final chord lingered in the air, vibrating through the old walls, before fading into silence. Marcus lifted his hands from the keys. For a moment, no one moved. Then applause broke like a wave, rolling over him, pulling him up from the bench. Emma ran to him, small arms wrapping around his waist. She looked up, her voice a whisper only he could hear. "We kept the music, Dad. And it kept us." He swallowed hard, pressing a kiss to her hair. Kate joined them at the front, standing just close enough for her shoulder to brush his. "That," she said softly, "wasn't just music. That was you." Marcus glanced back at the Billionaire, the golden light from the stained glass spilling across its surface. It no longer looked like a relic from a past life. It looked like a beginning. The audience began to drift out into the night, their footsteps quiet against the chapel floor. But inside, the last notes seemed to linger, as if the piano itself still had something to say. From the street, through the open chapel doors, the sound of the Billionaire carried, warm, steady, and alive, like the beating of a heart that had found its rhythm again. And that is where our story comes to rest, in a place where music, love, and kindness still have the power to change lives. I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. It's always a joy to see how far our little circle of stories can reach. If this tale touched you, I warmly invite you to subscribe, so we can share more moments like this together. Thank you, truly, for spending your time with me. Your presence here means more than you know. Outside, a few passers-by stopped on the sidewalk, heads tilted, listening to the piano drift through the open doors. Stained glass colors pooled across the keys like quiet confetti. For a long breath, the city moved around a small chapel that sounded like hope.